go ahead and get started. We may have a few more folks joining us. I'm Laurie Ferry. I'm the Director of Professional Learning at CISE, and I'm also the Director of Keep Indiana Learning. So we're the folks that put this whole thing on. I am certainly not going to take credit for putting on this whole conference. That was my team that did all that work. I just kind of go and do what I'm told when it comes to the conference. So I really hope that you're enjoying the conference. For those of you that are watching the recording of this session, thank you so much for watching the recording, and glad that you could join later in the year at some point when it's convenient for you. So this recording is available with live transcripts. If you're joining live, then it's available obviously with live transcripts. If you don't want to see the live transcripts or the subtitles, you might think of them that way, then you can just turn them off in the Whova app or on Zoom. All right, I'm going to be sharing some things in the chat, some handouts and some resources. And so you're going to want to make sure that you have the Whova chat open, even if you've joined in Zoom and you're going to be enjoying the session in Zoom, that's fine. Just make sure that you are sharing your information and sharing any questions that you have in the Whova chat, not in the Zoom chat. I don't have the Zoom chat open, and so I won't be able to respond to anything in the Zoom chat. And the reason that we do that is because as this recording is archived, it only archives the Whova chat and not the Zoom chat. So we just want to make sure that everything in terms of anything that we share and any insights that anyone might have is shared in the Whova chat. All right, so just wanted to give you a little bit of background information about me for those of you that may not know anything about me. And I'm seeing some names that I don't recognize, which is always fun to have some new participants. So I'm excited about that. So the first and foremost, most important thing that I want you to know about me is that, let me change my slide here real quick, that I am a grandmother. So this is my little granddaughter, Clara Drew. She is the light of my life. She is just turned 1. So this picture over here is her first birthday we had back in May. So she just turned 1. I know, isn't she so cute? Why aren't you guys blowing up the chat and saying how cute she is? Yeah, she is, I know, just terribly adorable. But I had to share that before I shared like professional information because she really is the light of my life. So she's my only one. Otherwise, I would have lots of pictures of grandkids, but I only have her so far. So next, to tell you a little bit about me, as I mentioned, I'm the Director of Professional Learning for CISE and also Director of Keep Indiana Learning. I have 31 years in education. Every time I say that, I kind of go, that can't be, but it's true. I started teaching high school math in 1990, which is a little crazy, or a lot crazy. From there, I was moved into an assistant principal role at Lowell, Indiana, Lowell High School. And then I went into a position in Valparaiso, Indiana. If you know, that was all that was up in the region, which no one from the region actually calls it the region, FYI. It's only when you move out of the region that people call it the region, just to let you know, a little bit of tidbit of Indiana information. So I was a high school and middle school principal up there. Then I did a lot of other things. I was a consultant for a publishing company, traveled around the country and did work for them with doing professional development for teachers around the country. I also owned a cognitive learning center called Learning RX. I had 3 locations in the Indianapolis area that I absolutely loved that work. It was so exciting. Then I went back into public education. I just felt like public education was something that was my passion and my calling. And so I went back into public ed. I was the K-12 math specialist for the Department of Ed. I did a lot of work with, after the Department of Ed, I did a lot of work with transformational leadership. So I went and worked with schools that were your low performing schools, your struggling schools, and work with leadership as well as teachers to help to raise up student performance and increase growth and achievement for students. So I did a lot of that work. Then came over and worked here at CISE. I've been here about 6.5 years. Absolutely love the work that we're doing. And really this pandemic for us has been as transformational as it has been with everyone else. Maybe not as transformational if you're in the classroom and in a building, but it really has been transformational in that we developed Keep Indiana Learning. And here we are a year later with a conference and over 10,000 people registered for the conference and will attend and look and participate over the course of the year with live and with archived participation. So we're really excited about that. I am going to put my presentation in the chat so you have access to it. I do have a version of it in the description, but it's the lesser version because I made some last minute changes because I always do that. So when you see this page in the presentation, you can click on the LinkedIn, the Facebook, and the Twitter icons, and you can connect with me via Twitter or LinkedIn or on Facebook. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about learning intentions. I am a huge Visible Learning follower. I'm a John Hattie fan club member. I don't have any t-shirts with his face on it because I'm just not much of a t-shirt wearer, but I've constantly, I think for the last 5 or 6 years, attended his Visible Learning conferences. If you ever get a chance. This year, again, it's virtual. It was supposed to be in Anaheim, California, but it's going to be virtual this year. I would highly, highly recommend it, particularly because it's super cheaper this year because it's virtual. Fantastic. So highly recommend it. It's always in July. Anyway, so we're going to talk a little bit about John Hattie. And the reason I'm going to put that in is because I did the poll and I had a lot of people saying that they weren't quite sure about John Hattie and about his research. So I'm going to do a little piece about Visible Learning and about John Hattie before we get started into surface deep and transfer learning, if that's okay. And we're going to talk a little bit about his effect sizes. But one of the things that I wanted to mention is I always do learning intentions because that's a visible learning thing. Learning intentions set any learner up for the self-regulation of being able to measure their own success. So if I don't start with learning intentions, you don't know what we're going to be learning. You don't have any idea of where I'm going to be leading you. And at the end of the session, I'm going to revisit these learning intentions, and you're going to have a sense of your own ability to self-reflect and self-regulate. Am I walking away with that knowledge? You'll also be able to reflect on my performance in, did I give you enough information in terms of resources and just sharing in order for you to feel successful about those learning intentions? So are we doing that with our students? Are we starting with learning intentions at the beginning of a lesson and even going to success criteria where we are saying to students, this is what we want you to learn today. This is where we're headed. And then if we don't talk about that same thing at the end of the class, then we can't help students to self-regulate, and we can't help students to know if they've been successful or not. And that level of success is what makes a student feel good about their learning, which is half the battle. If you can get a student to feel like they're successful, they want more of that. They want to engage more. They want to feel empowered more. So all that Trevor Muir talked about yesterday, all that Adam Saenz talked about today, and John Spencer talked about, all of that kind of comes together. And I believe, and I think John Hattie would say that it starts with learning intentions. Okay, so I'll get off my soapbox about learning intentions. Surface, deep, and transfer learning is a John Hattie principle, but it is a way of looking at phases of learning that really make sense about what we do first and what our expectations are of students. And then what I think is most critical is so often we use these different teaching strategies, instructional strategies, but we might be using them in the wrong phase of learning. So for example, we might be using a strategy that fits best in surface learning, and we're using it in transfer learning. So it's not, it might be a highly effective strategy, but we're sort of draining it of its effectiveness because we're using it in the wrong phase of learning. So what I want to help you to do today is let's look at these highly effective strategies, and we're not going to be able to dig in specifically to the strategies, but many of them, you know, these strategies. We're just going to match them strategy to the phase of learning so that we're making the most of these highly effective instructional strategies. All right, so that's what we're going to be doing today, and that's our learning intention. So we will revisit them in the end and see where we are. All right, so a little bit about John Hattie. He is Australian, so he has a super cool Australian accent, which is just very cool to listen to. He is actually no longer a professor at the University of Melbourne in Australia. He does visible learning full-time. He's still at the university. He just doesn't teach at the university anymore. He pretty much writes and does visible learning research. He's actually not an educator. He's a statistician. And so his work is really statistical work. It's not really educator work. He could have done this work around anything. He just has a passion for education. So in a nutshell, this is what his work is. It is a meta-analysis, like a super huge meta-analysis of educational, and this is a John Hattie term, influences, okay? So he calls things that we do in education influences. So an influence might be feedback that we give students. It could be teacher effectiveness policies. It could be formative assessment. It could be standardized tests. It could be grading practices. It could be recess. It could be homework. It could be retention, holding a student back a grade. So these are all things that we do in education that impact students. And what he does is he statistically measures the impact or the influence, the effect size of each of these influences on student growth and achievement. So he gives it a number, which makes it incredibly objective and not subjective. So it's incredibly powerful to just look at a number and know what it means, and then be able to make a more informed decision about what you're going to do with that influence. So what John Hattie has done is he's created a magnitude scale, if you will. So let's draw an analogy to earthquakes, okay? You may not know, this is obviously a map of the United States, but you may not know that there are actually more earthquakes on the eastern side, the east coast of the United States, than there are on the west coast of the United States. I didn't know this initially. So what happens is that there are more actual earthquakes on the East Coast, but the magnitude of the West Coast earthquakes is higher. Magnitude being higher on the Richter scale. And we all think about earthquakes. We actually had one in Indiana a couple of weeks ago, I think around Terre Haute area, but we felt it in Indianapolis. Some people did. So when we think about that, we hear more about the earthquakes on the West Coast because they have a higher magnitude. They have a higher impact. They cause damage. People feel them, okay? So it's the magnitude, it's the impact that we hear about. It's not the frequency, okay? So East Coast is frequency, but they're not impactful. There's not a strong magnitude, so we don't hear about them as much. Think about that as we think about John Hattie's barometer. This is his barometer of influence, okay? So we've got this on the screen. We've got this, it looks kind of to me as a former math teacher, looks to me like a protractor. And so we've got this scale that is in that semicircle shape. And the scale goes from on the left side, we've got the negative numbers, and it goes all the way over to 1.2 on the right side. And so we've got this blue zone that is called the zone of desired effects. And so there's this statistical measure. John Hattie did not make this up. This is a math term, effect size. And his magical effect size for his research is 0.4. So at 0.4, if an effect size is 0.4 or greater, that means that it's a desired influence. Because what that really means is at 0.4, it means that if you're doing that influence for a year's worth of time, you're going to get a year's worth of growth out of that student. Now, that seems kind of intuitive that if you have a student for a year in your class, wouldn't you think you'd get a year's worth of growth out of that student? But if you're an educator, you know that that doesn't always happen. There's a lot of influences that come in that impact negatively a student's achievement. Let's think about a pandemic, for example. Let's think about virtual teaching. Let's think about a student having to go from, oh, all of a sudden now in the next 2 weeks, we're totally virtual. And then the next 2 weeks now we're hybrid. Now in the next 2 weeks, we're not going to have school at all. And what happened last year? Oh, a negative impact, I would venture to guess. Now, were there some positive things? Absolutely. Were there some incredible things happening? Absolutely. But there were also some negative influences. And so what John Hattie is saying is, if you choose the positive influences, the blue zone influences, and you choose things as an educator to incorporate in your classroom, in your building, in your district, and you do those things, it will counteract the negative influences that we don't have any control over as educators. We don't have control over things like student depression. We don't have control over things like a student's traumatic experiences. We don't have control over a parent divorce. We don't have control over a student many times that's coming to school hungry or not having slept. All of those things that we feel so out of control about. But what we want to be able to do is make up for those negative influences. And that's what John Hattie's research tells us, that if we do things that are in the blue zone that we can control, like let me give you an example. Feedback. If we give students feedback that's effective and timely and actionable, it has an effect size of 0.82, 2 years of growth in 1 year period of time, 2 years. Why are we all not giving effective, timely, actionable feedback? And the answer is we don't always know that feedback has that power, that magnitude. So when we think about these highly effective strategies, we want to be using the ones that are in the blue zone and not using the ones that might waste our time. Let's talk about the orange zone. The orange zone is those influences that do not give you your bang for your buck. Let's talk about one in particular that's kind of controversial. Homework at the elementary level. Homework at the elementary level has an effect size of 0.24, which basically means that you get 6 months. Oh, my light just went out in my office. 6 months worth of growth. I'm trying to turn my light back on in 1 year's worth of time. So if you teach them for a year, they're only going to grow and achieve 6 months worth of growth and achievement. So you have to ask yourself, if I'm only getting about half of what that time is worth, is it really worth doing? That's a professional judgment decision. I'm not here to tell you yes or no. But if I knew that that was the case, and statistically that's what the evidence and the data was showing me, I'm not so sure I'd do it in my classroom. I'd pick a blue strategy that I knew was going to get me more bang for my buck. That's what John Hattie's research is about. Something in the red zone. I know that's going to have a negative influence, like retention is in the red zone. We don't want to retain students. We think that we are increasing, giving them some time to catch up, where actually there's a loss of learning. So let's jump in and take a look at some of John Hattie's influences that he studies. So I'm going to give you all kinds of information about all of his influences and how you can look up his influences. I just want to look at a couple that are interesting to look at. So we've got teacher clarity. Does a teacher know, do they put up goals or learning intentions and success criteria? Do they know where they're going? Do they communicate with teachers? All the way to things like class size or class discussion or the relationships between teachers and students. Trevor Muir and John Spencer spent a lot of time, and even Adam Science today talked about teacher-student relationships and how powerful that can be. So John Hattie has studied that. So what I'd like you to think about is, let's think about what would happen if you guessed, did some educated guessing, maybe some conversation around which of these strategies would have a low impact, below 0.4, which of these might have a medium impact. So they might be something that is 0.4 to 0.75. And which of them might have a high impact, like above 0.75? So almost 2 years of growth and achievement over a year's worth of time. Which of those are high impact influences? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put you guys into 2 breakout rooms. So I'm actually going to ask you to interact with each other and talk. It's okay if you don't want to turn your camera on because you still have your jammies on. That's totally fine. But I am going to give you just a few minutes to talk about these influences. So again, what I'm going to do is, first thing, I'm going to stop sharing because I'm going to put some things in the Whova chat. And so what I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask you to use this document that I am about to put in the Whova chat. And I'm going to ask you if I can find the Whova chat. So let me explain what I'm going to do, and then I will share my screen again, and maybe it'll pop up. So I'm going to ask you to click on the link, and then you are going to sort through. You're going to have to do, it's a view only document, Google Docs. So you're going to have to go ahead and do a copy, and then just type in there, do a check mark or an X or something into which of these you feel like is a low influence, which do you feel is a medium influence, and which do you feel is a high influence. And then I'm going to share a document that kind of gives you the answers, if you will, and then we'll go from there. All right, so I have lost my Whova link. Of course I have. And so if you guys all will just give me one moment to find that and possibly pull that up. I apologize. In the meantime, I'm going to do something that I completely told you not to do, which is to put it in the Zoom chat. So I'm going to do that. And let me again get into Whova and go into the session. And I really, really appreciate you guys' patience. I don't know what happened to my all of this. Okay, here we go. I am now posting it into the Whova chat, so everyone on the recording has access to it as well. So now what I'm going to do is I am going to have everyone go into some breakout rooms. So I'm going to put you guys into breakout rooms just for about 5 minutes. And while the breakout rooms are going on, I will ask, I'll talk a little bit to the folks who are here for the recording. So again, just breakout rooms, 5 minutes, and go ahead and categorize these as low, medium, and high. And I will see you all in about 5 minutes. You may have to click join the breakout room. Thank you all for playing along. I appreciate it. Don't have to turn on your video. You can just talk. All right. So for those of you that are still with me for the conversation on the video, let me talk with you because you can't get into the breakout rooms and hear the conversation that's going to happen. And when everybody comes back in from the breakout room, they're probably not going to want to talk about what they talked about. So I'm going to save us a little bit of time and talk about each of these influences. So as you see, we've got teacher clarity, teacher credibility. These are two really important pieces that John Hattie has really started to talk more and more about. And they are both very high in terms of their influence and their magnitude or their impact. When teachers know their content area, when teachers are trusted by their students, it makes a tremendous, tremendous impact on their learning. And again, I would encourage you, if you haven't already seen the Trevor Muir and the John Spencer and the Adam Sines keynotes, please, please take advantage of those. Those are fantastic sessions. Feedback is another high impact strategy. It is something that when we give strong statements of feedback, when we help students because we give actionable feedback that they can do something with, that has an incredibly high effect size. Formative assessment, when done correctly, in that you give students a check for understanding, but then you use that data to inform your instruction, that makes a huge difference in the student's ability to then make adjustments to their own learning. Collective teacher efficacy, you're going to find, has an effect size of around 1.25, which is like 4 years of growth and achievement over 1 year period of time. The thing is that collective teacher efficacy is that your entire building, your entire department, your entire school feels like they can make an impact on students. And so to get to that collective teacher efficacy, we all believe that together we can make a difference. It's hard to achieve. It's hard to achieve. But it makes a very, very significant impact. Class size has a low impact. And surprisingly, it does have a low impact. And that's something that a lot of folks think, hey, class size is a big deal. In John Hattie's research, it indicates it is not a big deal. Class discussion, 0.82, really significant, great strategy that we're going to talk about a little bit later. Teacher-students relationship, also a high impact strategy. It's so important that we build those relationships with our kids, that our students trust us and that we care about them. And that's not something you can fake. I think we've learned that over the course of the pandemic situation that's happened. And then we have homework, not effective. Elementary homework is a middle level effectiveness, and high school homework has a little bit more effectiveness, but certainly not something that is in the blue zone. Okay, we're going to go ahead and bring our friends back from the breakout rooms. And so we'll go ahead and close those breakout rooms as soon as I can find the breakout rooms. There we go. So we'll go ahead and close the breakout rooms, get our group back. They're probably having some great discussions. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. Welcome back. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. So I hope the breakout rooms went well. I am going to post something. Actually, I just did post something in the Whova chat that will allow you to find the answers to, because if I have a group of educators and I leave the conversation without giving you answers, I know that I'm in trouble. So this is a link to, let me just go there very quickly. This is a link to John Hattie's, I know it's kind of small, but certainly you can download it and make it a little bigger, 250 influences. Now, I'm going to give you a link at the end of the presentation that gives you real life, real-time data, because his influences are constantly being updated because he constantly is adding in more data. But he's up to about 3 million pieces of student data. But this is where you can look up collective teacher efficacy, which is by far the #1 influence at 1.24. It is about 4 years of growth and achievement by students over a 1-year period of time. Incredibly phenomenal and powerful. So go ahead and click on that document and you can take a look at what's there. So I'd love to spend some time. I could do a whole day just talking about these influences, but we want to get to surface, deep, and transfer learning. So we're going to go ahead and jump into that. So as we think about surface, deep, and transfer learning, it really was introduced in 2 books that John Hattie put out, and that was Visible Learning for Mathematics and Visible Learning for Literacy. So if you have not taken a look at these 2 resources, I would strongly encourage you to reference them, to take a look at them. They really are fantastic in terms of if you're looking for support with mathematics or support with literacy. And this is really where the surface, deep, and transfer was introduced. And I actually attended the Visible Learning Conference where John Hattie introduced these phases of learning, and it has evolved over time. So let's talk about what these phases of learning are. So we have surface learning, which is this idea of it's a skill and it's concept development. So every content area has these foundational skills, but also has these concepts that a student must have in order to understand and be able to do higher order thinking kind of skills. So that's our surface learning. And we're going to dig a little bit deeper in just a moment. Deep learning is when a student can take those concepts that they know, those foundational skills and concepts, and now connect them, apply them, be able to do something with those foundational pieces. The next layer is our transfer learning. And this is where they're not only can make connections within that content area, but maybe they're doing a PBL application where they're applying it to some other situation, some other content area, a real life example. So they're doing something new and unique is transfer learning. So let's dig in just a little bit more. So when we think about surface learning, it is not superficial learning. That is so, so important. When we think about reading, a surface level reading strategy or skill would be phonemic awareness. So when a student first learns to read and continues to read and develop their fluency of reading, if they don't have the foundational skill of phonemic awareness, they aren't able to sound out words. So they aren't able to build up their vocabulary, and their fluency and their comprehension is affected. So that is a surface level problem, not a deep learning problem, which is the reading comprehension and the acquisition and the building of vocabulary. So we have to be able to think about what is that foundational skill that really is building on, or that we are building on to get to these deeper transfer skills. Same thing with math. If I have a student who doesn't understand multiplication, they are really going to struggle with division because multiplication and division are very connected. So if I start to talk about the concept of division, I'm not going to just talk about, let's do long division today. And I'm going to put a problem up on the board, 4 divided into 106. Okay. I'm not going to just jump in and start doing long division and showing them the steps of long division. Long before I do that, I have to talk to students about the concept of division. That division is the inverse of multiplication. And that division is taking a whole and putting it into equal parts, dividing it up. If I have 24 cupcakes, how much is each student going to get? Well, it depends on how many students are in the class, right? Those kinds of things. So it's not just the skill of long division that we're talking about. It's not the skill of being able to do sounding out a word, phonemic awareness. It's also being able to understand the concept of sounding out words and building vocabulary. The concept of what does it mean to do division? What does division even mean? So those are the surface level skills. So when we are building a student's surface level learning, it's really those foundational skills and concepts. And this comes from developing assessment capable visible learners, which is another fantastic John Hattie resource. So if you are talking about assessment in your classroom or in your district, this is a phenomenal resource. Deep learning. Okay, so deep learning is really when we've moved from skills and concepts to conceptual understanding. And I talk about this all the time when I'm doing math training. It's about a student being able to understand why. When you understand why, you can apply your understanding of, let's say, division to a division problem. So for example, I'm reading a story problem in math, and I recognize, oh, this story problem that's talking about 24 cupcakes, and I have 12 students in the classroom, how many cupcakes does each student get? That sounds like division because I conceptually understand that it's division because I know what division is because that was a surface learning skill. So now I can apply the concept of division to being able to solve that problem about the cupcakes. What happens with reading? I can sound out words. I have acquired vocabulary. I have built fluency, all as a surface level learning. Now, my deep learning is I can read for comprehension. I can tell you the main idea. I can make inferences. I can do a character analysis. There's all kinds of things, the power of it now that I have that surface level learning. So that's the power of that surface level. And then we have that deep learning. The problem is we have to get to that deep learning. We have to make sure that we get there. So it's applying those skills. It's being able to connect the concepts and connect the surface level learning. That also comes from assessment capable learners. Transfer learning. Transfer learning is where we are doing new and unique situations. Perfect example is the I Learn performance tasks. Perfect example. Because the I Learn performance tasks, here's how we used to prepare students for the applied skills tasks on I Learn or the writing prompt on I Learn. Except it wasn't I Learn, it was I Step. Okay, I misspoke. So on I Step, the writing prompt, we could pretty much figure out what the writing prompt was going to be. And we could pretty much figure out what the applied skills question was going to be for math. And so we would have students practice and practice and practice and practice, and then we'd practice some more. And we would give them enough of those types of problems that they could pretty much replicate what we had shown them to do with the problem because it was close enough. That is not transfer learning. That's just replication. Now we have iLearn coming along, right? Several years ago, iLearn comes along. And all of a sudden, the educators are looking at the performance task and looking at the written portion that the student has to do. And they're like, wait a minute. This is asking them like really kind of unique questions. These are new to the students. Then we as educators figure out that you could do problems until you're blue in the face. You could do writing prompt after writing prompt after writing prompt, and it's still going to be new and unique to the student. That's because it's transfer learning. You can't train a student. You can't practice enough to get to transfer learning. To get to transfer learning, the students have to take their deep learning and their surface learning and learn to apply it at a new level, to be able to self-regulate, to know when all the pieces come together and fit into a new and unique situation. The best way that I know how to describe it is if I am a mathematician, meaning that I'm a student who really understands conceptually, I understand math and I can do the math and might be a different way or it might be a certain pathway, but I can do the math. Then I'm a problem solver and I'm a critical thinker. If we have created problem solvers and critical thinkers, they can do transfer math because they look at a new and unique situation and they think, I think this might work. I think this math applies. I think this concept applies. And if I put them together in this way, not because somebody showed me, but because I can actually do it my own way, then they've got it. If I'm a writer and I've done character analysis and I've found the main idea and I've done inferences, but this new writing is asking me this new and unique kind of question that maybe I have to do a little bit of this and a teeny bit of that and a lot of this, and I've got to pull it together in a new and unique way. I can do that if I've done surface and deep learning. But if I haven't, and I haven't mastered those, then transfer learning becomes very important. And most important, if I've never been asked to do transfer learning because my teacher doesn't think I'm ready for it, and has low expectations, and I've never been asked to do it, then I'm not going to be very good at it. I'm going to be terrible at it. Because just like anything else, if we don't have practice and we aren't given those opportunities, then we're not going to know how to do it. So herein lies the problem, is that so many times we get caught laying around in surface level learning, or even laying around in deep level learning, that we never ask kids to do transfer level learning. And not because it's on iLearn, but because we've got to create really strong writers. We've got to create really good readers that could read anything, that have the skills and the strategies and the connections to read anything, nonfiction, fiction, literacy, literature, all those things. We need to create mathematicians, not just students that could do math. And to do that, we've got to give them opportunities in the classroom for transfer learning. That's what John Hattie is saying. So the next step in this is, how do I do that, Laurie? Like, how do I do that? And the key is to the strategies. So what we've got to do is we've got to align the strategies to the task. So let's take a task like this, okay? This is a math task. People who know me know math is my first love, so I'm sorry, but I'm doing pretty good with the literacy and language arts references, I think. So when we think about the idea of this particular problem, I'd like you in the chat to mention, to just type in, do you think that this is a surface task, a deep task, or a transfer task? I'm going to give you a moment to answer that just in the chat. Make sure the Whova chat. Do you think it is a deep, surface, I said that the wrong way, surface deep, or transfer task? And if you have a thought as to why, I would love to hear that as well. Which do you think it is? Give you a moment to pop that in the chat. Heather, thank you for your response. I appreciate that. So we've got some surface. Love that. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Chris. Anyone else? Surface, deep, or transfer? Surface, deep, or transfer? All right, so let's talk about this. This problem is an application problem, right? Story problem in math. It basically is asking the students to multiply 9 times 14. You have 9 gift bags and 14 dog treats. And so the question is, how many dog treats do you need? Okay. So in the end, the students are just going to be multiplying. So you might think to yourself, if all they're going to be doing is multiplying, and I could use the area model to do that, then it's just surface learning. But we have to ask ourselves, what is the student actually doing? They actually have to read the problem. They have to pull out their surface learning to say, hey, this is really about multiplying, because it doesn't say multiply these numbers together. That would be surface learning. If it said 9 times 14, what is 9 times 14? That would be surface learning. But this is an application. So they've got to pull 9 and 14 out and know that it's multiplication. So we really want to think about being able to apply, to pull out, to discern. So this is a deep learning. It's not transfer because it's not new and unique. This is a type of problem students have done 100 times. So not new and unique. So it's a deep level learning. All right. One thing I want to show you, and this was something that John Hattie posted at the Visible Learning, the annual Visible Learning Conference, which is why I'm citing AVL 2020. And so this was a virtual conference, by the way, if you're wondering, how did you go to a conference in 2020? This was a virtual conference. But this was something that he put up on the screen, and he talks about, if you are, this is kind of weird, but if you're only doing surface level learning in your classroom, you're at an effect size of 0.15. So very low effect size. very low impact, very low magnitude. But if you are going to deep and transfer learning, you have an effect size of 0.54. You're just in the blue zone. So if you're not doing the deep and the transfer, you're sitting in that surface. You're sitting in that low level of impact and magnitude. So we've got to make sure, and the effect sizes are showing us, we've got to make sure that we are in that deep and transfer level of learning as well. All right, so let's get to these strategies. So I have an activity that we're not going to do in breakout rooms because we just don't have time, but I am going to do with you. Actually, it's not really with you. I'm going to do and you're going to watch. So sorry for that. But you will have access to the activity. So if you want to go back and do this with some teacher colleagues, some peers, or if you are a building administrator or coach, you can certainly use this with your teachers as well. So if you look at, and when you get access to the presentation, you'll click on the activity. And I have several slides here that you can see that I've just replicated. And so we'll use slide 1. The activity is you want to take a look at all of these strategies. Concept mapping. If you have if you're a teacher of any subject area, you've probably done some concept mapping or had some students do some concept mapping. Spaced practice. You might have done some spaced practice and not even known it. Spaced practice is I've practiced, then I've taught a new concept, I've practiced. I'm going to leave it for a little while, maybe a day. Then I'm going to come back to it and I'm going to practice some more. And then I'm going to leave it. And so you're constantly spiraling practicing. That's spaced practice. Spiral review is spaced practice. Mass practice, according to effect sizes, does not work. Practice, 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 practice until they master it does not work because then they forget it. So I could get off of that soapbox as well. But what we're going to do is we're going to align the strategy to the level or phase of learning. So I'm going to do this kind of quickly because we want to make sure that I give you the correct answers before we leave. So when we look at note-taking is very much a surface level strategy. The student is in the act of taking notes. They're either copying from the board or they're listening to you and writing down what you're saying. Every single one of these strategies is in the blue zone, in the barometer. So they're all effective strategies. So note-taking is an effective strategy. Concept mapping is when a student has information, but they have to organize the information, make connections, and put it into some sort of processing that they understand. And so that is associated with deep learning because a student can't do that unless they've foundationally learned the knowledge in order to then do the organization. They can't apply it or make connections without that. If we have the Jigsaw method, which look at that effect size, 1.2. It is a phenomenal strategy. And it is perfect for surface learning. I'm going to give you a glossary of which you can look up the Jigsaw method. You can Google the Jigsaw method. Fantastic strategy. I'd strongly encourage you to use it. Spaced practice is a surface level. Again, high effect size, not mass practice, surface level practice. So spiraling review is a great way to get students to learn that surface level learning. When we think about a student becoming self-regulated or a student having self-efficacy or their belief that they can do it, that is where we get into transfer learning. A student, think about the performance task on iLearn. One of the reasons that students struggle with that task is because they don't have a belief that they can do the work. And so having that belief is part of the success of transfer learning. So that self-efficacy is really important. Self-questioning is also a transfer level skill. Because when a student can ask themselves some questions as they're processing kind of that metacognitive piece, that's when students can do that transfer learning. So the metacognitive techniques are also our transfer learning. Direct instruction, absolutely phenomenal for surface learning. And look at that. Direct instruction has an effect size of 0.6. Direct instruction, talking with students and the teacher doing that direct instruction still has a really good effect size. It gets a bad rap sometimes. The problem is we don't want to do an hour of it. We want to do mini lessons. But when we have the idea of discussions, we want that to be in deep learning. We can't do discussions in surface learning because students don't have the knowledge to know what to discuss. That discussion needs to happen in deep learning. It can also happen in transfer learning, but deep learning is where it fits best. Organizing our notes. This is the same thing as kind of concept mapping. I now have my notes, I've taken my notes, but now I'm going to organize my notes. I'm going to think about them. I'm going to make an application and categorize them in a way that makes sense to me. Then we have problem solving teaching. This is where they're problem solving, reading a story problem or thinking about real world models and how I find solutions, and that's our deep learning. Peer tutoring. Peer tutoring really, really works best in our deep learning. And this isn't about the tutor, this is about the student who's getting the tutoring. So really helps to support them when they can make those connections, when they're hearing from another student, how that student makes connections. And then we have reciprocal teaching, which is a fantastic strategy. I would also Google reciprocal teaching. And that fits into our transfer learning. Vocabulary acquisition is simply a surface level strategy. It's a fantastic strategy. We do vocabulary all the time. If students aren't building vocabulary, then they're not building their reading fluency or their comprehension. And then study skills, those test taking strategies are really just a surface level strategy. Okay, so I'm going to leave this here. These are answers, right? So if you come back and you do this activity, then you'll have the answers to the activity. So I'm going to go back and make sure that I'm sharing some resources. Here is a glossary that you can click on. That is a John Hattie glossary. So it gives you information about reciprocal teaching and Jigsaw and concept mapping and some of those things that you may have some clarifying questions about. These are some resources that are linked here. The Visible Learning MetaX is, again, real-time effect sizes. So as John Hattie continues to build in his more and more data points, this keeps up with the effect sizes. So effect sizes change all the time. And so you're always going to want to keep up with what is the latest effect sizes, and the MetaX does that for you. I referenced Keep Indiana Learning because we have tons of visible learning on-demand videos. I've done a couple, Carrie Rosebrock has done a couple, and so please feel free to access those. They're on-demand and free. And then this Learning Currents also gives you some videos that are free on demand that are hit some of the strategies that we've talked about today as well. So there are our learning intentions again. How are you feeling about those? Did we hit those surface, deep, and transfer learning phases? Are you able to identify which of those strategies? You may not feel like you're at a 5 out of 5, but you might feel like you have some familiarity with those. All right, I want to make sure that I am sharing the presentation. So let me quickly put that in the Whova chat so everyone has access to that. So again, our on-demand friends, as well as our live friends, there is the presentation. All of the links are in the presentation. So please feel free to access the presentation in that way. And then the last thing I would just mention is please fill out the survey that is in the description. So if you scroll below the screen that you're watching, you'll see survey feedback. And if you could go ahead and do your feedback there, and that is how your PGP points are, oh, someone's writing on my screen. Your PGP points are actually email to you directly after you hit submit on the feedback survey, whether you're watching on demand or live here, then you can get your PGP points. It is exactly the top of the hour, so it is lunchtime. Wherever you are, it's lunchtime. So thank you guys so much for joining me, and I really appreciate it. Feel free, my email is here. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or need any professional development support. Thank you all for joining.